On today's episode, Philipp Kurashev has officially filed for arbitration, but fret not, the Blackhawks are still expecting to get a deal done. And with that being the case, I'm going to take a look at the projected forward group for the 2023-2024 season. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Friday, July 7th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can check me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder to go and show some support if you haven't done so already. I know that over 50% of the viewers right now are not subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Do me a quick favor, go and smash that subscribe button for me if you can. It won't cost you anything. It'll only take 2 seconds to help grow the show, and also that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. I also wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure to go and download the FanDuel app right now because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. FanDuel, the number one sportsbook in America. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. Happy Friday to everyone out there who's tuning in here today. If you're listening or watching this over the weekend, I hope the weekend is going lovely for you thus far as well. And to kick things off on the show here this afternoon, I figured we'd start with some updates on restricted free agent forward Philipp Kurashev, who is kind of the last deal of business that the Blackhawks are expected to make here in the offseason. We did hear Kyle Davidson recently say to the media that maybe the Blackhawks are going to add another defenseman at some point. I'd expect someone on the right-hand side, but he also mentioned that they could be waiting until training camp to make a move like that to see if anyone gets placed on waivers, similar to what we saw happen with Jared Tenorti last year, where he was placed on waivers by the Rangers. The Blackhawks claimed him, and that wound up working out pretty well. So it does really feel like Philipp Kurashev is going to be the last deal of business here for the Blackhawks, but he did officially file for arbitration earlier in the week, although the Blackhawks, Kyle Davidson, even said to the media he fully expected this to happen, and that doesn't really shouldn't be cause for any concern because he fully anticipates and expects a deal to be worked out between the two sides before that moves forward into arbitration, before the case actually reaches that point itself. So it feels like Kyle Davidson really has been wanting, based on not only just what we've heard him say recently, but this has kind of been his feelings on this matter really for the past couple of months. So Philipp Kurashev sounds like always, shape, or form. We don't exactly know when. Davidson didn't offer a timeline or anything, but it does like it's going to be happening before he hits arbitration. So I would expect something to be announced probably within the next week or two, if I had to guess. But for the 23-year-old Kurashev, he is coming off of a season in which he set career highs in goals, assists, and points, all while taking a major leap in terms of time on ice. He saw a much more sizable role for the Blackhawks this past season, essentially stapled in somewhere in the top six all year long, really. So with that being the case, I do think Kurashev is absolutely going to get a raise off of I think he made $775,000 last year. I do expect him to get a raise, but as far as what the deal may look like, I would expect it first off to be a 1 or 2 year contract, like you see with all these RFA cases for the most part. It's also what Kyle Davidson has obviously been wanting to try to do throughout this offseason. But as far as a dollar amount, the AAV for Philipp Kurashev, I actually kind of think a deal similar to what we saw Ryan Donato get last weekend is a good little reference spot, a 2-year, $2 million deal. I feel like Philipp Kurashev has kind of put up similar production to that, although it has been this past year, at least, it wasn't a larger role than Ryan Donato has ever really gotten in his NHL career. But I think a 2-year, $2.15 million deal does make sense. Maybe Kurashev winds up getting a little bit more, but I do believe it's going to be somewhere in that $2 to $2.25 million ballpark. But with the Blackhawks, like I've said several times now, anticipating to get a deal done with Philipp Kurashev, and that being what we believe is going to be the final piece of business here for the Blackhawks in the offseason, I figured it would be a good and fun idea to kind of take a look at the Blackhawks projected forward group for the 2023-2024 campaign, because I just don't really see them adding another forward to their roster before training camp in the fall. I was actually a little bit surprised when they signed Ryan Donato in free agency, because as you'll all understand here in just a moment, when I get into breaking everything down, it just kind of feels like the Blackhawks have one too many forwards at this point in time. Now, I understand injuries are always part of the game. That's something I've really learned and become more aware of covering the Blackhawks full time these last couple of seasons. Undoubtedly, someone is going to get hurt. I hope it doesn't happen, but it seems to each and every year for a majority of NHL clubs. But I still do think it's a little bit more of a cluster, and it's clumped a little bit more of a clustered forward group than I expected the Blackhawks to roll with for next season. But getting into some of the lines that I've kind of put together here, and obviously we're far out from the season, so I don't want to hear anything about, oh, that guy should be playing with this guy. Listen, these are just hypotheticals here. I'm just trying to shape together a lineup for the Blackhawks. But as far as my top line goes, I have Taylor Hall, Connor Bedard, and Andreas Athanasiou. What a pace that trio would play at if they do wind up getting together next season. Then on the second line, I have Lucas Reichel, who we fully expect to be a full-time NHLer. Cole Gutman as the center. I'll have more on him coming up a little bit later in the show. And then Taylor Radish as the right wing. On the third line, I have Philipp Kurashev, Jason Dickinson, and Tyler Johnson. And then to round things out, on the fourth line, I have Nick Foligno, Ryan Donato, and Corey Perry, all three new additions to the Blackhawks for next season. And quite honestly, that looks like a pretty solid and fun forward group, a team that can play with some pace inside their top six and also has some good veteran leaders, guys who can kind of take on penalty kill roles, defensive minded roles there down in the bottom six as well, and can play with a little bit of edge. That's why I like bringing in both Nick Foligno and Corey Perry. Ryan Donato adds some skill and a little bit of size down there as well. But the reason I kind of feel like the Blackhawks have one too many forwards at this point is because taking a look at their extras, at least the extras that didn't make it into my mock lineup here, I have Colin Blackwell, Boris Kachuk, Mackenzie Entwistle, Reese Johnson, and Joey Anderson. Now, if I'm being honest, Joey Anderson's probably going to start next year with the Rockford Ice Hogs. Oh, wait. He didn't get an offer. No, they brought him back. Just kidding. I almost scared myself there because I realized, wait, Philipp Kurashev was the only RFA they were bringing back. They took care of that ahead of time with Joey Anderson. Very excited for him to be returning to Chicago. Anyways, the likelihood that he makes the NHL team, NHL roster out of training camp is pretty slim after these additions of Donato, Perry, Foligno, Taylor Hall as well. It just looks like Joey Anderson, unless he'd have to have a great training camp in order to crack the opening night lineup. I just don't see that happening. But even then, even if he does open up the year in the AHL, there's Colin Blackwell, Mackenzie Entwistle, Reese Johnson, and Boris Kachuk. And listen, I understand Kachuk only looked good for like a 15 to 20 game sample size last year. Reese Johnson really doesn't provide all that much outside of physicality and being a good face-off man. Mackenzie Entwistle maybe didn't take the step we wanted to necessarily see last season, although I am still high on him moving forward. And then Colin, it's just hard to see where all of these guys are going to fit. More importantly, the young guys like a Mackenzie Entwistle, who, in my opinion, should probably be in the lineup given where the Blackhawks are at right now, night in and night out. Kind of same with Reese Johnson and Boris Kachuk. I think it's an opportunity right now for the Blackhawks to see what those guys have, as they've obviously attained a lot of draft picks and a lot of high round picks, and those are the players they want to kind of be leading the rebuild. You still need to shape out the rest of your roster, and I think it'll just be a good opportunity to see if Entwistle, Reese Johnson, or Boris Kachuk could be a potential bottom six guy of the future here. So it was just a little bit curious to me to see how aggressive the Blackhawks were in the forward market in the offseason. I fully expected them to make moves, but I really didn't anticipate them making this many. So with that being the case, I do wonder if the Blackhawks would consider trading someone like a Colin Blackwell or a Jason Dickinson before the season begins. I do absolutely believe Colin Blackwell would be the easier one to move, considering he has 1 year left at $1.2 million compared to Jason Dickinson having 1 year left at $2.65 million. And quite honestly, with Jason Dickinson being the one who can play center, and we've heard Davidson say recently, they're going to give Bedard, Reichel, Gutman opportunities to play center. But if that doesn't work out, they do want to have guys that can come in and play center if things don't go well. Jason Dickinson is one of those guys. Colin Blackwell really is not. So I do wonder if Colin Blackwell could be on the move before training camp starts, because there's just, in my mind, and listen, I fully understand injuries are a part of the game again, and that absolutely could happen in training camp. But in my mind, it just feels like the Blackhawks have one forward too many at this point in time. So I'm very interested to see if anything is going to happen here before training camp opens up in the fall. All right, folks, there are my thoughts on the Blackhawks projected forward group for next season. Coming up in just a moment, I will get into some of the new jersey numbers that we'll see these players wear next year. But first, I need to talk to you all about FanDuel. Go and make your home run trot over to FanDuel, as baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That's because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. You just got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, place your first bet, and you'll get up to $2,500 back in bonus bets if your bet doesn't win. And I've been riding hot pretty recently. Fading the Kansas City Royals just kind of been my mentality all year long. Been up and down with the Cubbies, but it's been still a pretty successful baseball season altogether. And I've been betting on FanDuel every single day. Make sure not to miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500 when you join FanDuel today. You just got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon in order to sign up. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, if you haven't done so already, please make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. I'm really trying to boost up the numbers right now, and if you're subscribed to the channel and subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram, following Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram, I should say, you'll have a chance to win some cool free Blackhawks stuff with the giveaway that I'm having right now. You just got to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, follow the Instagram account, and DM Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. Just a little screenshot that proves you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, and you could be the lucky winner and walk away with some cool free Blackhawks stuff. All right, segment 2, I did want to talk for a minute about some of the new sweater numbers that were announced by the Blackhawks earlier on in the week. And obviously, with a handful of new faces coming on for next season, Taylor Hall, Corey Perry, Nick Foligno, Ryan Donato, etc., there's going to be some new Blackhawks sweater numbers that are going to be dished out for the upcoming season. I figured it would be kind of a fun little segment with not much going on right now to talk about those new numbers for a couple minutes, and also discuss some of the past history and the past players that we've seen rock those numbers here in recent years. So first and foremost, Ryan Donato, the most recent addition to the Blackhawks roster, he'll officially be wearing number 8 for the Hawks next season. He's actually worn a bunch of different numbers so far throughout his 5-year NHL career. He wore number 9 with Seattle, 16 in his small stint with San Jose, number 6 with Minnesota, and number 17 with the Boston Bruins, the team that drafted him. And I also noticed he wore 16 in college when he was with Harvard. So Ryan Donato's just kind of been all over the place with his numbers But I guess he's going to be giving number 8 the old college try for the Blackhawks this upcoming season. Of course, that was worn by Blackhawks legend Jack Johnson, who also just recently re-upped with the Colorado Avalanche, by the way. That's just a match made in heaven, Jack Johnson and the Colorado Avalanche. Fine, I'm looking for someone who loves me the way the Colorado Avalanche love Jack Johnson. That's really what I'm looking for in my future wife. But of course, we saw Johnson wear number 8 last year. Nick Schmaltz wore number 8 for a handful of years prior to that. Dominic Kubalik actually wore number 8 more recently than Nick Schmaltz did. But we've also seen Nick Leddy wear number 8. Some really good players have worn number 8 for the Blackhawks in years past. We'll see if Ryan Donato can be the next one to join that list. We've also seen a couple of other Blackhawks legends wear number 8 in the past. Kim Janssen and Matty Walker, the real ones out there, will remember each of those two from over a decade ago now. But yeah, Ryan Donato, the new number 8 in Chicago for next season. Then we also have seen Jason Dickinson swap to number 16 from the number 17 sweater that he wore last year. And he originally wore 16 when he broke into the NHL with the Dallas Stars. But once they acquired that Joe Pavelski guy, he kind of probably felt a little reluctant to change to number 17, given that Joe Pa is a historic player, one of the greatest Americans of all time, a new face to the franchise. Yeah, Joe, I'll let you wear number 16. No worries, buddy. I'll go and rock number 17. But now with Jujhar Khaira not coming back to the Blackhawks, he wore 16 more recently. And also with Nick Foligno coming to Chicago, someone who really likes to wear 17, it only made sense for Dickinson to go on back to that number 16 sweater. And we've seen that be worn by a couple of Blackhawks greats over the history of this franchise, most notably by the great Eddie Olczyk and also by Bobby Hall for a few years there as well. It was also worn by Stanley Cup champions Marcus Kruger and Andrew Ladd, and then most recently Jujhar Khaira these past few years, and that Nikita Zadorov guy. I really don't like to bring up Nikita Zadorov's name all that often because that's how terrible his tenure was with the Chicago Blackhawks. At the same time, happy to see him go and become a productive defenseman for the Calgary Flames. Since departing Chicago, I just had a feeling it was never going to work out here for Big Z. I just mentioned Nick Foligno coming to Chicago. He's going to be wearing number 17, a big number 17 guy in his career. Obviously, like I just said, Jason Dickinson wore that last year, but Dylan Strome was the one to don number 17 in the few years prior to that. But before Strome, it was really kind of a scrub number historically here for the Blackhawks. We've seen Lance Boma rock number 17, Sheldon Brookbank, Brendan Morrison. Rest in peace to Jimmy Hayes, was one of the better players to rock number 17, a really strong rookie year for Jimmy Hayes here in Chicago, for those of you who may remember him as well. But Nick Foligno, the newest to rock number 17 here in Chicago. Flip that number around, and you got Taylor Hall's new number 71, which he wore for the first time most recently with the Boston Bruins, and I guess he's deciding to stick with that number here in Chicago. He's been number 4 and number 91 in the past, so obviously number 4 is off limits. Number 91, though, very interestingly. But yeah, some may remember 71 is not a number that we've seen very often here in the Blackhawks organization. Philipp Kurashev, did he wear 71 his rookie year? I think Philipp Kurashev wore it his rookie year and then switched to 23 the year after, if I remember correctly. But yeah, he was the first one to wear 71, whether that was in the preseason or if it was for a full season. I can't exactly remember, but he was the first. And then Blackhawks legend Lucas Wallmark was actually the second to wear the 71 sweater. And now Taylor Hall, got a hiccup, is going to become the third. And then last but certainly not least, Corey Perry, who I still have to go like this and be like, wow, Corey Perry's really a member of the Chicago Blackhawks. 17-year-old me would not be happy to learn that fact, that Corey Perry would be joining the Blackhawks somewhere down the road. But Perry is going to be wearing 94 for the Blackhawks this upcoming season. I think that's interesting because Perry notably has worn number 10 for the majority of his career. He's worn it everywhere he's played, except for his small stint with the Montreal Canadiens. And a question I posed on Twitter the other day was, I wonder how hard / if at all Corey Perry pushed for that number 10 number that was obviously donned by the great three-time Stanley Cup champion, the sharpshooter himself, Patrick Sharp, who now has a front office role with the Philadelphia Flyers. Congratulations to Sharpie on that. As much as I'm going to miss him in the Blackhawks booth next season, I really do wonder if there's going to be another number 10. Feels like Sharp is one of those guys in that really weird range where you're not sure if his number is going to get retired. I would probably guess that it isn't, but I also would love to see it happen, obviously. But just curious as to whether they'll let someone else wear 10 again, or if Corey Perry even asked. He obviously going up against Patrick Sharp there for many years, is well aware that he was number 10, and that's a legendary number here in the Blackhawks. I wonder if he pushed the Blackhawks front office or anything at all about wearing that number, but obviously, I didn't expect the Blackhawks to give it to him. I was just wondering if he pushed for it at all. But Perry will be wearing 94. He is the fourth player in franchise history to rock number 94. Yannick Perreault, Blackhawks development coach, father of Gabe Perreault, first-round pick who slid all the way down to number 23 for the New York Rangers in the 2023 NHL draft. His dad, Yannick, actually was the second player to wear number 94 in franchise history. And then Alec Regula was 94, but I don't believe he wore it in an NHL actual game. I believe he only wore it for a preseason game or for a little stretch there. I don't think he ever was in the NHL as 94. So Perry might technically be the third player actually to rock that in real game action for the Blackhawks. But yeah, those are the new numbers that we're going to see out of these new faces, and Jason Dickinson switching it up on us for next season. Coming up in just a minute, Hawks fans, make sure to stay tuned because I still have to get into some final offseason tidbits before things really quiet down these next few months. All right, before I wrap up today's show, real quick, for those of you everydayers out there, the next episode of Locked On Blackhawks, of course, will be Mailbag Monday. And on my YouTube channel, in the community tab that you can easily find at the top, I have a post where you can respond with your question. I'll answer it live on the show this following Monday. So make sure to go and do that real quick. I always enjoy responding to fan questions out there, and make sure to hit that subscribe button while you're at it to help keep things moving in the right direction here on Locked On Blackhawks. All right, segment 3. Before I get on out of here for the weekend, folks, I wanted to leave you all with kind of some final offseason tidbits as we are nearing the quiet hour of the summer, middle of July through, the beginning of September. There really just isn't all that much NHL news coming out. There's nothing really all that groundbreaking, especially for the Chicago Blackhawks, considering the position they're in. They have a full forward group. I referenced how Davidson said they might add one more defenseman, but I don't think they're going to be doing anything more in free agency. The last deal of business really is just getting Philipp Kurashev a new contract. But there were a couple of things that have gone down within the last week or so that I wanted to be sure to mention to all you fans out there. First and foremost, development camp actually wrapped up here this morning. And I really, although I was absolutely disappointed that the Blackhawks elected to go with off-ice activities only, I do understand the mindset behind that, and it does kind of feel like it fits better with the regimen that most of these prospects are on at this point of the year. So I absolutely understand it. It was still heartbreaking to not see some of these most recent additions to the organization be able to hit the ice and kind of see what they got. That's really what I've enjoyed about the summer these last couple of years is the Blackhawks development camp, walking on down to Fifth Third Arena when it's, 85, 90 degrees out. You don't get that very often here in Chicago, and going and seeing some of these 18, some of them 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids and learning more about what we have in store for the future of the organization. I've really enjoyed that. So I was a little bit crushed that the Blackhawks went to off-ice activities only, but I really did like to see some of the things they were doing throughout the course of the week, right? I loved how they brought in former Stanley Cup champion Johnny Oduya, two-time Stanley Cup champion on the back end for the Chicago Blackhawks, someone who I thought in 2015 really sacked up when we needed to the most, because the 2015 regular season, some of you forget about this, Johnny Oduya played like balls. He was not good. Johnny Oduya was not good in the 2015 regular season. The Blackhawks went with a 4 defenseman plan, basically the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. Johnny Oduya was absolutely sensational, and the Blackhawks would not have won that cup in 2015 without him. But for those of you who remember Johnny Oduya, you probably remember him for being absolutely shredded throughout his entire NHL career, particularly here with the Blackhawks. Someone that's always had really good fitness, been in phenomenal shape. And the Blackhawks actually brought him in during development camp to talk about some mental health stuff, some breathing exercises, and just kind of some advice and some good guidance, I think, all in all, to these young kids about how to take care of your body, how to be a proper professional in all aspects of life, because these are, kids that are coming out of high school, 17, 18 years old. Most of them, while it absolutely has gotten better in the last, decade or two, as far as diet and all that stuff, they still, are deer in the headlights at this point of their careers, just, being drafted and being so young. I really thought it was a wise decision to have someone like Johnny Oduya come in, someone who is a valued member of this franchise for what he did in his time here. So I really like to see Johnny Oduya come in. I also just like to see some of the stuff that the Blackhawks prospects were doing. I really thought it was cool to see them boxing and hitting the bag. I think that absolutely is while, fighting might not be a huge part of the game, I think just building strength and having that confidence in yourself, I think that's a smart exercise for them to be doing. And all in all, I just like to see the camaraderie between all of these guys, right? Like we saw the Blackhawks prospects go and throw out the first pitch at Wrigley Field, like we saw them do last summer as well. There was just also some really cool, like 4th of July pictures and, oh my gosh, I can't think of the camera, the Polaroid pictures of all the guys on a boat tour on the Chicago River and stuff, and just like really enjoying their time together. I absolutely thought that was great. And to see them enjoying their 4th of July and to have that camaraderie right off the rift, I mean, I think that's absolutely excellent for the culture that the Blackhawks are trying to build here moving forward. And speaking of that culture, Connor Bedard throughout development camp, folks, I thought, and it's nothing different to leading up to the NHL draft and just how he's handled himself for the last year. It just, every time I see him talk and every interview, I just get more and more confident that he's the right type of kid to handle this generational talent type pressure that he's going to have on his shoulders here in Chicago. I know people are expecting him to be the saving grace of this franchise, and that's a lot to put on a 17-year-old kid. But it feels like Connor Bedard is the kid for that. Like, he's just so humble. Looks like he's really enjoying himself. Like, he's clearly uncomfortable with the fame too, right? Like, he doesn't, like all the stuff that comes with it. He's getting shout out by Drake on Instagram, but he more just like appreciates the opportunity that he has in the spotlight to like inspire kids to be better hockey players. He talked about that in the media, and just hopefully he can create more hockey players in the world because of this spotlight that he's given. So I just think he's just, I've talked about this in the past couple of episodes, but when Kyle Davidson said he's a special player, but an even more special person, everything that I've seen from Connor Bedard really tells me that's 100% the truth. He's so humble, never thinks about himself first, despite being the talk of the town at all times. And it just really seems like he's enjoying himself and truly being himself. And that's another thing that was notable to me. He said he just wants to lead by being himself. And I think that's just an absolutely a beautiful thing for, a generational talent like Connor Bedard to say, and someone who could even be the future captain of the Chicago Blackhawks. I think that's absolutely the right mentality for him to have. And yeah, he's just an awesome guy, man. It really seems like Connor Bedard is just an awesome guy, taking the time with all the Blackhawks prospects to go play floor hockey with, some young kids. It's been really awesome to see Connor Bedard enjoying this experience and handling it properly throughout the way. Next tidbit I wanted to get into, I guess I forgot to mention this. Kyle Davidson spoke out about how he loves this culture that the Blackhawks youngsters are already setting, and loves to hear Connor Bedard say things like that. I wanted to add that as well. Another noteworthy tidbit that I had written down. We heard Rockford Ice Hogs coach Anders Sorensen speak recently, and he mentioned that 2021 first round pick Nolan Allen, who's a big left-handed defenseman. They actually may consider switching him to his offside and becoming a right-handed defenseman. He has played that spot at times throughout his junior career thus far, but given how deep the Blackhawks are on the left side with Korchinski, Kaiser, Vlasic, Phillips, Ethan Del Mastro, right? There's just so many left-handed defensemen. It's much thinner on the right side, 100%. So it would feel like a smart transition to move Nolan Allen to that side, and hopefully he'll be able to handle that transition well. One of the only right-handed defenseman prospects that the Blackhawks have in the organization, Sam Rinzel, one of 3 first-round picks in 2022. Oliver Moore spoke with the media during development camp, and he announced that he's going to be rooming with Sam Rinzel at Minnesota next season, which I absolutely love to hear. Just 2 more notable Blackhawks prospects just becoming friendly and getting more camaraderie with one another. And speaking of those 2 that are going to be playing in the Big Ten next year, Moore did reference as well that the smack talk with University of Michigan forward Frank the Tank Nazar has already begun to ramp up, with those 2 being a little bit of rivals there in the Big Ten. Should be really fun to watch Big Ten hockey this year, given all the Blackhawks prospects that they have in it. And also when they do go up head to head with one another, you know, they're going to want to be getting the best of each other out there, which should bring the best out of them. And then last but certainly not least, update on Cole Gutman, which I mentioned I'd get to earlier in the show. Good update here on Gutman. He is expected to be ready for training camp in the fall after undergoing season-ending shoulder surgery, I believe back in April. And I do believe he's going to get a middle 6 center opportunity right out of the gate on opening night for the Blackhawks if all goes well for him in free agency. I think Cole Gutman, despite having kind of a small sample size at the NHL level, I was absolutely intrigued with what I saw out of his speed and skill combination, and his tenacity kind of reminds me a little bit of Brandon Hagel from a few years ago. So really excited to see Cole Gutman healthy and back on the ice for the Blackhawks next year. Expect him to have a really meaningful role right out of the gate. All right, folks, I think that is going to wrap up Friday, July 7th's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube right now if you haven't done so already, and go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Check me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until Monday's episode, everyone out there, enjoy your weekend, and thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.